This is the Build Wealth Canada podcast, episode number 41.
Welcome to the Build Wealth Canada podcast, where it's all about becoming debt-free, accelerating your wealth, and taking control of your money. Now, here's your host, Cornell Schreiber.
Hey, it's Cornell, and welcome to part 2 on the Build Wealth Canada show, where we're continuing our conversation with the 25-year plus financial planning veteran, John Kalos, on how to execute an early retirement. So as you saw in part 1, to keep things practical and not just theoretical, we'll be using my own actual financial plan that John did for us to answer some of the common questions about pulling off an early retirement. Now, just a quick reminder that if you have your own questions for John, and or if you'd like to know whether you're on track to retire when you want, then you can get a free consultation with John by going to buildwealthcanada.ca/John. That's buildwealthcanada.ca/John, just John. And when you sign up, you also get a free guide on the top questions to ask your financial planner, which you can use to help you come up with some questions to ask John, or you can use them on your existing financial planner or advisor to see if they are still the best fit for you. Now, in this episode series, you'll notice that John and I talk about doing index investing using ETFs, which stands for exchange traded funds. Now, we're both big fans of this type of investing because it's an easy and passive way to grow your investment portfolio while also letting you take advantage of the lowest fees in Canada. Now, if you want to learn more, you can learn exactly how I invest in this way by trying out the index investing course, risk-free, over at buildwealthcanada.ca/invest. That's buildwealthcanada.ca/invest. You'll have 60 days to try out the entire course risk-free. And if it's not for you, just send me an email and you'll get a full refund, no questions asked. All right. So once again, that link to try the course risk-free is buildwealthcanada.ca/invest. All right. So I hope to see you there. And now let's continue with the show. All right, so in our case, you factored in everything that we just spoke about to see if we can fully retire or at least semi-retired right now. And what I really liked in particular was the summary page that you produced, where it talked about things like what's the most we can spend annually and still have enough to stay retired, and how much we actually need to retire. So so using our actual numbers and financial plan as an example, like as a real life example, can you speak to what the results for us were in the context of what are the answers that we should have from our financial planner when getting a financial plan like this done?
All right. So I touched up on that a little earlier, but I'll get into it again and give you some clear ideas. So you're sitting with a financial planner. They've done your financial plan. There are options, and the first thing that we need to look at is if the objectives of the client are realistic. So if you're saying, I got $200,000 in savings and I want to have $60,000 when I retire, but now I don't want to spend any more money, you're not being realistic, right? Or I don't want to save any more money. You're not being realistic. So the first job is to make sure that the goals that a client has are realistic. And if they're not, they should be explained to the client what they need to do to make it a little bit more realistic. All right. So the choices are, though, we'll talk in your case, but I'll talk also in general. In your case, what you gave me a certain number that you want to spend when you retire, after taxes are paid, for example. How much can you spend, after taxes? And I told you, well, you know what? Based on how you're investing your money, based on how much you have, based on your life expectancy, so on and so forth, I told you that you can spend a little bit more than what you're looking for. So that was one choice. Another choice, and this typically doesn't happen the way it did for you, Cornell, that you can retire at 33, all right? But, typically somebody will say, I want to retire at 60. So I can show them, well, you know what? Yes, you have enough to retire. Or, you know what? You might need to work a little bit longer. If everything else is equal, you don't have enough money. You might need to work a little bit longer. Or based on how we're investing your money and how much money you have and how much you're planning on saving going forward, you can retire 5 years earlier. So that's an option that should be discussed. Another option that I showed you and that I show everybody is based on if everything else is being kept equal, retirement age, the amount of money you want to spend, you might be able to take less risk. That was the case in your situation. Or I might tell people, you know what, everything else being equal, keeping your retirement age the same, keeping the way, how much money you're going to be saving, then you might have to increase your risk. which I don't like doing because typically we've established with the client how much risk that they're able to take, or how much of the ups and downs they could digest. But that's an option. And in your case, the option was you don't need to be 100% equity or 80% equity. It's different for everybody, but that's another option. Okay. The other option, which is basically, I'll show you if you have enough money to retire or not at a certain age. So if you don't have enough money, I'll say you need to save a little bit more, or you need to be doing part-time work when you retire. So those are the options basically that people have. They can increase their lifestyle or decrease it based on the numbers. They can retire later or retire earlier. They can take less risk, or they have to come up with more assets. So it's not only, there's one choice and let's choose whatever. We can blend everything. When I use a financial planning software, I have a button that says optimize, and it'll show me, you might have to work 2 more years and you might have to save an extra $2,000 a year. And you know what? You might need to increase your equity a little bit. So we can obviously take things and put them or blend them together, let's say, and come up with several changes. But it's always good to know if you're able to retire on time, how much money you're going to need, how much money you're going to save. That's pretty much it.
Mm-hmm. Yeah, and I really, really like that because it was almost kind of like a menu of options, right? And you can spend more or less. You can retire earlier or a bit later. You can take more or less risk, right? So it's not, and like you said, it's not an all or nothing type deal, right? So it's not like, oh, to hit our number, we have to, decrease our expenses by 40%, and that's so unrealistic, and we'll never do that. And now you're kind of, depressed because because you're like, oh, I'm gonna have to keep working till much more than, you know what I mean? So
till 85,
yeah. Whereas if you're not all or nothing, if instead it's like, okay, well, look, these are the different levers you can pull. So let's say, okay, well, we'll spend a little bit less. We'll work maybe just, just a little bit later, maybe like an extra year or so, and we'll take a little bit more risk. So yeah, it's going to be not as smooth of a ride, but it's going to make a big difference. So it's like you're taking, you can take it all from one bucket, or you can take little bits and pieces. And when I like this, just taking bits and pieces from each one, because then your lifestyle isn't drastically changed, for example,
sure.
And yet you still get to hit your goal. So it's really neat how you can kind of play with these different levers based on the client, and then they can say, okay, this is kind of what we feel comfortable with, and then this is what's kind of sustainable. So I don't know, I really like that approach.
Yeah. And I'll tell you one more thing, Cornell, that we haven't discussed is, when you have a financial plan like this, the way you have right now, for example, the way all my clients have, it's very difficult to get it wrong. It's very difficult, pardon the expression, to screw up, because let's say, for example, the markets do very, very poorly this year. Okay. Next year, I'll come and have a discussion with my client and say, well, you know what? Obviously the market underperformed this year. So now it looks like, instead of saving $5,000 a year, you know what? Let's bump it up to $5,500, because we're compensating for this poor year that we had. On the other hand, we've had great years over the past, 6, 7, 8, 9 years, where I was able to tell clients, well, you know what? You don't need to save so much anymore. So go get that car that you wanted, for example. Guilt-free spending, okay? And this is something, I just brought this term up, and it's very important to me. There's so many, and this happens a lot in my industry. There are so many people that are saying, don't spend a lot of money, right? Think of your future and stuff like that. Well, man, if I can't spend money when I'm alive, when am I going to spend it? All I'm saying is that you have the ability to know how much money you can spend. And usually it's more than people want you to think. All right. So having a plan like this, if I tell someone you need to save $4,000 a year, for example, well, now they know, after I save that money, I can spend it on anything else I want. So, they're not constantly thinking, am I saving enough? Will I have enough when I retire? A plan shows you if you're saving enough or not. and it makes it clear on whether you should take that vacation next year to Hawaii or not. You know what I'm saying?
Oh, for sure, for sure. And I know, yeah, like when you did ours, it really, the peace of mind I got was awesome. Yeah, because like just to know that, okay, you've also crunched the numbers, you've done all that math as well, and so to know it, so kind of eliminates like, oh well, maybe that doubt, like, oh, what if I did something wrong, or okay, well, my math says I can spend this, but can I? But you start second guessing yourself, right? Like, can I really, right? And then, but in this case, it's like, okay, look, I've had a professional look at this. We have a plan, everything, it's good. And so it's much less stressful, and the guilt-free thing is I think nice as well.
Correct.
Yeah. So
very important.
Yeah. So no, I thought that was a really good thing. Yeah.
Mm-hmm.
All right. So now that we have all the numbers that we need from doing a financial plan, let's say you've done that with a client, we've got all that. Let's switch gears and talk about how to actually execute an early retirement or an early semi-retirement. So once you know that you have enough in your investments. So we've gone through the investments. There's enough. So to start off, how should our portfolio change when we move from that accumulation phase, so where we're working full time, where we're saving, we're investing, to the decumulation phase where we're not working at all, or maybe we're just working part time. Maybe that part time isn't enough to, let's say, fund our entire lifestyle. So we're actually maybe drawing down on the portfolio a bit. How does the portfolio structure change when you make that leap?
Okay, so I'll say this: the major change that needs to happen, and this is probably the only change that I think is universal to everybody, and I'll tell you what I mean. You need to get a little bit more conservative with your investments, plain and simple. Because if the markets do go down dramatically in any given year during your retirement, then your portfolio is going to suffer. So it's a good idea to have a certain amount of money that is going to be coming in every year, and that can be accomplished again through pensions, but it can also be accomplished through annuities or on any other type of investment that's safe, or guaranteed investments, for example. So the one step is definitely people have to get a little bit more conservative. Unless you have a ton of money and you're not going to run out of it, then you can take more risk. But when you're 75, and again, your portfolio is 80% equity or 100% equity or 60, whatever, and the markets go down by 30%, you're having, heart issues at that point, because you're seeing money go down and you're also withdrawing from it as well. That's a double whammy. So you definitely have to get a little bit more conservative. Now, when it comes to what other things need to be taken into account, well, that'll depend again on what the goals are. Say for example, in any situation, Cornell, you have a certain amount of money and you want to leave some money to the kids, not only the house, or you don't have a house, but you want to leave money. Well, then, you might want to say, I'm going to live off the dividends and the interest that I'm going to be getting from my investments. On the other hand, if you have no children and you want to spend all your money, well, then you're going to be living off the interest, dividends, and you're going to be taking out some of the capital as well. So it comes to the boring answer of it all depends, but it really all depends. Now, there are certain, I won't say rules of thumb, but there are certain things that have to happen. And one of them, as I said before, is getting a little bit more conservative when you retire. Mm-hmm. It's also a good idea to have, like every year, I think it's important to start off the year with the amount of money that you're going to need for the next 12 to 18 months, for example, in your bank account. So if you're in a situation right now where you're retired, Cornell, and you got, let's say you want to spend whatever, $50,000 a year, and you have that $50,000 in your bank account, who cares what the markets do? You're living this year, right? And usually when markets go down, they don't go down forever. I mean, looking at the worst case scenario again, which was 2008, the markets bounced back relatively quickly. And I say relative to the drop that they had, which was about 50%, and the sky was falling, and it was the end of the world back then, and I lived that. The markets came back, relatively quickly. They were still volatile, but they came back. So usually a down market lasts 12 to 18 months, sometimes less, sometimes a little longer, but there are statistics about these things. So if you're holding 12 to 18 months worth of money in your bank account, and I say bank account, I mean in a guaranteed investment that you can have access to whenever you want, which is earning a boring 1.5% right now. But that's another important, aspect to consider when you're retired. Have the money that you need for the next 12 to 18 months. Maybe even if you're very conservative, maybe even go 2 years. It's not going to hurt.
Yeah, no, that makes sense. Yeah, and then when in retirement, should Canadians tweak their portfolio to generate more yield and just try to live off that, or do you suggest just selling off a percentage of the portfolio every year during the good years, and then doing something like keeping a cash cushion during the bad years, so that you're not selling your investments when the markets are down? These are kind of two different strategies that I find people often kind of debate about, right? As like the whole live off the yield, live off the dividends kind of approach, right? Versus no, draw down your portfolio by a sustainable amount every year, and so the dividends aren't that's not a primary thing that you're looking at necessarily.
Right.
Yeah.
And that goes back to rules of thumb, and I take it back to what are the objectives, what are your goals. I have a client who doesn't have any children, and he's in retirement right now, and they've accumulated a significant amount of money, but they spend a lot of money also. So we're definitely not living off the dividends and the interest, because he's going to leave $2 million behind to who? To his cat. We're drawing down. We're drawing down on the capital as well. We want him to end up pretty much with zero. But again, it comes back to it all depends. I have another client who wants to leave an estate. He wants to create a foundation when he passes away. So with him, we are living more off of the income and taking some capital. And there's going to be money left over for charity. So it really depends. Structure your portfolio in a way from a tax point of view where you're obviously spending the least amount in taxes, and if your portfolio is large enough to live off the dividends and interest, then great. But again, it depends. And again, I'm saying it reluctantly, because I hate when I hear, it all depends. Like, give me a straight answer, for crying out loud. But truly, there is no straight answer to that. I told you can live off the dividends and interest because you're going to be working part-time and so on and so forth. And then you said, and then I told you, so you won't even be touching your capital. But then you said, like, I might not want to leave any money to my kids, or I might want to leave the house, whatever. Yeah. It all depends on what a person values.
Yeah.
But generally speaking, people don't live off the interest and dividends only. There's a drawdown. And like I said, you mentioned an interesting point where if we've had a bumper year in the markets, and we made 13% instead of the 8 that we need, or 7 or 6 that we need to sustain ourselves, chop it up a little bit and put that in safety. It doesn't hurt.
Mm-hmm. Yeah. Yeah, like in our case, we were thinking, just to do the house can go to the kids kind of deal, right? But the actual investments, if you've earned that, you've been working for that, investing that, I don't feel guilty for using some of that to actually like live and enjoy that kind of stuff, right? And, like the how I don't know if I get a house in retirement from like the parents, like I'll be pretty happy, right? Like that's nice enough of a gift, I think, right?
Everybody has different ways of valuing things, and I certainly, if I say myself, I don't want to say it loud because my son's upstairs, but I'm not gonna leave them any money. They're gonna have their house.
That's why I'm getting defensive here now, because I'm like, what if my daughter listens to this one day? Yeah, and she's like, hey, Dad, what the heck?
But you know what? That's also you're teaching him the value of saving money.
True, and I don't want there to be a sense of entitlement either, right?
Exactly.
Like, I don't know. I think getting the primary residence after the parent, like I think that's a really generous gift, right? That the kid is even there shouldn't be like an entitlement where like, I should definitely get the house, and I should get their RSP money too, and like I don't know.
And you know what? There are others that'll say, and I have a client that says, you know what? I put money for their down payment on the house that they live in. They can, that's their house. Too bad. Meaning not too bad. It all depends on what people value. Mm-hmm. And I think, the clients that tell me, my daughter got married and I bought her a condo, or at least I put the down payment on the condo. That's enough for me. I go, perfect. You're making your contribution to your children, and others don't want the children to have anything. There's no right or wrong, is what I'm trying to say.
Yeah. I figured, we'll help the kids out, during their lives, right? But once we're dead, it's like, okay, you can have the house or whatever, but I'd like to go on a trip or something, as opposed to like, oh no, the kids have to have some money saved in an RSP that belongs to us or whatever. You know what I mean? So, but yeah, anyways, exactly. I'm getting defensive in case my daughter hears this. I'm like, so it's gonna no Father's Day card for me.
Make it a rated X. So she won't be able to listen.
Yeah. Make it like we have to. We'll start swearing in the podcast so it gets ranked as as explicit.
Change the settings. Change the settings on our
yeah, but that's going back to kind of the living off the yield thing. Yeah, like because that's something that I know others have kind of considered that, and I know we definitely have as well. It's just like when I first approached you about this, I thought, well, hold on, should we maybe put our investments into just higher yielding assets? Because right now, like we're index investors, right? And so yeah, you get some dividends off that, but there are higher yielding things we could do. But then you're getting that extra yield at the expense of growth, right? And long term, you make more if you were more kind of growth oriented, right? So that was sort of the debate. But then yeah, like you mentioned, well, if we structure in a way that we're just living off the yield, well, so you're not touching the principal at all. It's just growing and growing and growing over. Like, so what are you gonna do with it at the end, right? When you're like 80, like you know what I mean? Like, are you trying to build an estate? Because if you are, that's fine. But if you're not, then why would you just want to live off the yield?
There you go. And that comes back to that also comes back. Things are so interconnected. That also comes back to the rate of return that you're using and the amount of risk that you're taking.
Right.
If you don't want to leave an estate, again, there's so many different ways of looking at it, Cornell. If you don't want to leave an estate or whatever, you can have a much safer portfolio, which doesn't fluctuate. So you don't care if the markets go down 30% or not. And that way you're going to have less of capital, 20 years down the road, but that's fine with you because you're not going to leave it anywhere. You're not going to give it to anybody.
Right. Yeah. Exactly.
Excuse me.
No problem. Yeah, no, so that's great. So, kind of we're talking about fixed income a little bit here. So for the fixed income portion of your portfolio, how do you decide between using bonds versus doing something like a GIC ladder? And can you maybe define what a GIC ladder is for maybe anyone that's not familiar with that strategy?
Yes. Okay, so let me start with GICs first. And one thing is certain, there are people that say, I want my money to be totally guaranteed, and if I see the money go down by just a little bit, I'm having a hard time and I can't sleep at night. That's where you definitely say GICs for clients. Bonds and bond funds or bond indexes or bond ETFs also go up and down. As a matter of fact, this past week or so, we've seen some bond funds take a big hit because interest rates have gone up. So I like to use, for a certain portion of the safety portion of a portfolio, I like to use GICs, and we do what's called a GIC ladder, and I'll explain that. Let's say I have $200,000 and I'm going to invest it all in GICs. It's not a bad idea, depending on where interest rates are. It's not a bad idea to say I'm going to take some of that money, put it in a 1-year GIC. Some of that money, put it in a 2-year GIC, some of that money in a 3-year. And when I do these things, I usually stop at 3 years because, again, over the past so many years, interest rates have been so low. I'm a little hesitant to lock in some money at 4 and 5 years, but it's a good idea to do something like that. So then every year there's some money that's coming due, and you can take that money and then either you're going to use it or you can reinvest it in another 3-year GIC or 4-year GICs, or if rates go up, do a 5-year GIC. The bottom line is you have a sum of money, you break it up into 3 or 4 pieces and put in anywhere between a 1 and a 4-year GIC. And every year you have some money coming due. So if rates go up, you can take it and put it into a 4 or 5-year GIC. If rates go down, well, you can say, at least I locked some money at 3 and 4 years. So I'm not really hurting. And I only have a small sum of money coming due when interest rates are low. So that's what a GIC ladder is. It's breaking up your money into different maturities of GICs. And for that matter, you can also use bonds, individual bonds. But the thing is, individual bonds have been giving less return, less interest than GICs, which is something unique. It's been happening for many years now, but usually it's bonds that give better rates than GICs. But bonds are so low right now that banks, to compete, have to give a little bit more for GICs. So that's what, a GIC portfolio looks like. Now, if people are okay with seeing their money fluctuate just a little bit, then I might go into a bond portfolio. I'm never going to use the word mutual funds. Sorry, whoever is a mutual fund lover, they're just too expensive, especially bond funds these days where they're making 1 or 2.5%, and 1% goes to the bond manager. It's crazy.
Oh yeah,
but
I've seen
but
some.
you could
I've seen
use
some of those, and it blew my mind. Where it's like, we had a family member that was like, "Hey, Cornell, can you just take a look at these investments I bought a while back just to make sure I'm not getting had or anything?" And I looked at it, and I'm like, "You got to be kidding me! Like they're earning
getting had.
Earning nothing. Yeah, because they're still charging the really high fees, but the interest is so low on the bonds that it's like you're getting nothing. It was ridiculous. So
correct,
yeah.
correct. And I hate to say this, I'm biased. You know what I'm biased towards, Cornell? I'm biased towards the indexing. And Warren Buffett said to his family, when he dies, they should buy the S&P 500 and that's it. Right. They should buy an index. In other words, for people who don't know the lingo, they should buy an index or several indices. And that's what I do. And I'm saying it in a whispered tone in a sense, but I guess that's my bias. I hate to use the word bias, but I'm biased towards inexpensive investments because I've seen studies time and time again where it's difficult for portfolio managers to beat an index. So that's what I stick with.
Mm-hmm. So if somebody is comfortable having at least a little bit volatility in the bond kind of portion, would you recommend they just don't even bother with GICs and just stick to having bonds as part of their safe portion?
I think so. And you can go get more yield. And sometimes I'm hesitant to use terms of the industry, but you can get a better return. You can make more money with corporate bonds, for that matter. Mm-hmm. When interest rates are very low, you want to make sure that the bonds that you're investing in are shorter maturities, anywhere between 1 and 5 years, 1 and 7 years, let's say. And I'm not saying the investor should be doing this. This is what your financial advisor should be doing. When interest rates are high, you might want to go into a longer term, bonds, 10, 15 years. Those were good, 15 years ago. And when interest rates were coming down, those funds were making a lot of money. But now I'm getting a little too technical, I think. But definitely go into a bond fund if you can accept seeing the money go up and down a little bit. It's still very, very safe. And you can increase some of your yield by using, corporate bonds. So Walmart, for example, might have a bond out there. Not a bad idea. They're going to pay you for sure. Mm-hmm. Or Coca-Cola, or banks for that matter.
Yeah, no, that sounds good. And then we talked about this a little bit, but what size of a cash cushion do you suggest for people that are in retirement or semi-retirement? I've heard 2 years used before, but I remember when you crunched our numbers, you were like, oh no, 2 years would be totally excessive in our case because I still want to work part-time, right? So I know kind of, there's rules of thumb in a way, but they vary depending on your situation, like it did in our case. What kind of cash cushion do you suggest for people, maybe those that are, fully retired versus semi-retired, something like that?
I like saying, and as an average, I'll use 18 months, a year and a half.
Oh, okay.
Gotcha. And if someone has a lot of income coming in, which is steady income, then they don't need anything, right? If that steady income will provide for them. Mm-hmm. But someone who's depending on their portfolio for most of their income, I'd say I've said 12 to 18 months. I've got up to 2 years, but I'd say on an average about 18 months.
Okay, gotcha. And then for someone that's, let's say, just working, they're not retired, not semi-retired, what's it? What kind of how many months of expenses do you generally suggest?
When someone's working, you're saying?
Yeah, if someone's just working.
So you're talking about somebody who is working right now. How much money should they have, like in an emergency fund?
Yeah, exactly.
There's the rule of thumb is six months. Okay. Mm-hmm. Again, I played case by case. Mm-hmm. if somebody has a very, very secure job, like a government job or something like that, and interest rates are low and they haven't built an emergency fund and they're concerned, I tell them, don't be terribly concerned. You have your regular income. If, you have a line of credit in case of an emergency again, I say when interest rates are low, right? But it's not a bad idea of having 6 months.
Mm-hmm.
But if I'm somebody who's making $100,000 a year and there's a decent income coming in, and usually they say you should have 6 months of income. I'm not going to scare somebody into saying they should have $60,000 in the bank just in case they get fired or whatever.
Right.
I tend to think again that the industry scares people into thinking that they should have a ton of money sitting in cash also. And let me tell you one reason. The most profitable product that a bank sells to their clients is a bank account that earns little interest, because they take that money and they lend it to somebody to get a mortgage at 3 or 4%. They're making a killing.
Right.
So I'm just saying, don't get totally scared into saying that if you don't have an emergency fund, you're dead. It's a good idea to always have one, but 3 to 6 months for me is more than sufficient.
Yeah, that's a good point. Yeah, it's almost a bit like that 70% kind of guide that we were talking about earlier, right? Where it's
Right.
like, oh, you're in retirement, you need 70% of your income. Where it's like, well, it depends. Yeah, and I like your point, like you said, like if someone's making, like let's say you have a couple, let's say they're both making, 100,000 or something, or they're, or one of them is making quite a bit, but then their expenses are like ridiculously low. Well, you shouldn't just take a percentage of that income and say, oh, that's always the rule. Because it really depends on, well, what are they actually spending? What are the necessities that they're spending? Like, what are the discretionary expenses? What are the non-discretionary expenses that they can cut down if they did lose a job or something like that, right? So yeah, there's all these, and like how secure is your job and severance and all this kind of stuff. So yeah, like 6 months is the most common one I've heard used, just from other, all the different sources and stuff. But yeah, I just want to pick your brain to see if kind of you're on that board, kind of if you feel the same way. But no, so thanks for.
And again, I just hate rules of thumb. Okay,
Yeah.
What if somebody has a ton of money in their RSP and they lose their job? They can start withdrawing money from their RSP, tax-free at a certain level, right? Or at low taxes. So if I have $1 million in my RSP and I lose my job and I don't have, $80,000 in the bank account as my emergency fund, I'm not very concerned. You know what I'm saying?
Right.
So it all depends. Yeah. If somebody doesn't have a lot of savings and they have debt, obviously they should be paying off their debt first. But that's in a situation where there's not a lot of savings, your job is not very stable, let's say, or anything could happen. Then it's not a bad idea to build an emergency fund. But it's also quite difficult for a lot of people to build an emergency fund these days, let's face it. And that's where we gotta come back down to the times where we're spending less than we're making. That's what's killing us. And it sounds so easy, and you know what, but that's what it is. I'm getting a little opinionated here, Cornell, okay? But unfortunately, we live in a society where we value ourselves and other people based on the toys they have. That's too bad. That's really too bad, because people who can't afford these toys and still buy them anyways, the stuff is going to hit the fan eventually.
Right. And with how low the rates have been, right, for years now, right? It's
free money.
I mean, it's so easy to just, take out a home, like people using, like their home equity line of credits as like just as a cash machine, right? Like, just buying things. As an ATM rather. Yeah.
That's the term that I see people using. And you know what? There's some great people out there on social media, and I follow you, I follow some other people. And this is what everybody's talking about, that we're using our house like an ATM, and there are some people that have $500,000 in debt, all right, in a house that they can't afford. And if interest rates go up by 2%, which would still make them historically very low, $500,000 debt all of a sudden is costing about $1,000 more a month. And that's 2%. And again, I stress an increase of 2% is still historically very low. I mean, we've lived through low interest rates for close to 20 years now, and they've been going lower and lower and lower. Nothing says that they're going to stay like that. So we just have to be careful with these things.
No, for sure. Yeah, I never quite understood the whole thing where people are like, "Oh, well, I want some granite countertops, so I'll use a home equity line of credit to pay for it." I'm like, but you don't have that money. Like that's a loan, right? I don't know. I can never wrap my head around. But people do it all the time, and I noticed in the marketing too, right? It was very much. I remember seeing all kinds of marketing campaigns from a lot of the banks where they're basically, take out a home equity line of credit, use it to upgrade your house. Like that was basically what the marketing message was, right?
Correct.
Like, you watch HGTV, you see all these cool things, and it's like, well, hey, you've got equity sitting in your house. Why not tap it and buy that thing? You know what I mean? And
exactly.
And I'm just like, but that's not. You don't actually have that. I don't know. It's a loan now, right?
You know what? Again, Cornell, there's a conflict of interest here because we're going to our banks for advice. And they're not going to tell us, don't take a line of credit, you can't afford it. There are clients that I've suggested to pay down their debts. When you're walking into a bank, I don't know how this will sound, but they want you to invest your money. So they're not going to tell you, oh, you have some cash, pay your debt. They're going to say, you have some cash, invest it. Because that's how they're making money, unfortunately. There's not a lot of people that'll tell you, use your money to pay down your debt. I have clients now that I'm working with that have credit card debts of 20%, and they're saving $300 a month in their RSP and some money in a TFSA. And I'm like, stop. Your debt is costing you 20%. Screw what the bank told you about, but you should start building anyways.
Right.
Get that monkey off your back first, because that's what's costing you a lot more money. And it's difficult to get an unbiased opinion out there. And let me say one more thing here, Cornell, because I know many of your listeners are millennials, okay? And the demographics that banks don't want to work with are millennials, because they don't have hundreds of thousands of dollars to invest, okay? When a bank does your mortgage, they make $0 on it. They want your bank account, they want your credit, they want your investments. So that's why they might treat you well when you're doing, a bank loan. But when it comes to you speaking to a professional and getting a good opinion and getting a valid financial plan, when you're starting off with $10,000 in savings, nobody will want to speak to you. You're lucky if you speak to a junior banker of how you should invest that money or have a financial plan and stuff like that. So unfortunately, from an investment and retirement planning point of view, there's not a lot of help out there for the 20-somethings and 30-somethings, and that's just too bad, because again, the industry is based on commissions, and if you don't have a lot of money, nobody's really gonna give you the time of day.
Yeah, I mean, and this is coming from you. I mean, you're like the insider, right? Because you've actually worked in the banking industry, right, for quite a while. So you kind of see how it works, right, and how things function and all that. So it's not like you read this somewhere. This is that you actually seen this living, breathing thing.
That's right.
Happen to Canadians. Yeah. And I enjoyed your point about how, how if somebody is in, like your clients you mentioned, right, they have credit card debt, and yet they're being told to, invest in the RSP, that kind of a thing. And I mean, I'm thinking of it from the bank's angle, right? And it's like, well, for the bank, it's like, okay, if that client has everything with them, which, there's a good chance they have quite a few different things with them, right? Because it's just convenient to stick with like the same provider, right? So it's like, okay, so that client might have a credit card issued by the bank, right? They may have a mortgage issued by the bank, and they may have investments that they're doing through the bank, right? So now, so the bank's getting fees from the investments, they're getting fees from the credit card, they're getting interest from the mortgage, right? So it's like, what they want you to just increase those amounts, right? They don't want you to pay off the debt, or right? Like,
no, of course not.
You know what I mean? So it's more, yeah.
That's right. It's and here's the again, the reality is banks have become a sales machine. Okay. They still haven't gotten it quite right, but all they think about is sales. Everyone has objectives. So when and those objectives are looked at on a daily basis. So every day you're looking as to where you're going to make as much money as you can. And when it comes to getting biased or unbiased opinions, okay, let me give you one example that I always use. Let's say you're walking into, let's say let's say there's a banker who is at 60% of their objectives for mutual funds, and they're at 130% for their objectives on GICs. And you got somebody walking in, your next client, who has money to invest, and they're looking for an opinion. Should they be safe, or should they be in mutual funds, for example? I'm sorry to say, but it's very likely that you're going to be put into mutual funds, whether they're good for you or not, because that advisor is at 60% of their objectives, and their boss is down their back, breathing on them heavily. I've seen this happen. And if you remember, maybe last year, within the past year, there's been lots of former bankers coming out and talking about these things. And it exists. It exists. I mean, that's just how it is, unfortunately. That's why I'm saying, again, we're sort of stepping back a little bit, but I'm saying, be very wary when you're working with somebody who's working on, salary and commission, or they're paid based on the products that they sell. There are some products that the bank sells that are much more lucrative to the advisor than others. Just keep that in mind.
And I guess too, like the banker you're working with, they may not, because I guess it depends how their compensation is structured, right? But it's not like everybody receives, like the banker that you're dealing with directly receives direct commission, right? But I imagine their bonus is probably tied to that, or their job security is probably tied to that, right? So even if they're not getting physically paid by the mutual fund provider or whatever the case is, they still have that very strong conflict of interest there to push you one way versus the other that best benefits them, that gets the boss off their back, or helps them get promoted because they sold more mutual funds than the next guy, even if they're not necessarily getting that commission directly from
I'll say this, bankers who do some mutual funds and mortgages, for example, they don't get any commission, but they have objectives. But I'd say when you're dealing with a financial planner in a bank, if they sell a lot of mutual funds, they're making a lot of money. So it is commission based. If they get a small base salary, but if they sell a lot more mutual funds than GICs, they'll make a lot more money. 100%. So that happens at the branch level. And when you're at the brokerage level, it's all commission, 100% commission. So at the banking level is a little different, but people are still driven based on the product that they sell. They'll make more money based on the product that they sell.
Gotcha. Sounds good. Yeah, no, I know we kind of diverted from the.
But
this is really, I can tell that you and I are very passionate about this.
It's
so
important.
It's fun to talk about. Yeah.
It's important, it's very important. You got to be able to trust and get an unbiased opinion out there. And sometimes when I have clients, I'm telling them, pay off your debts. They're like, what do you mean? I go, yeah, it's costing you, when you put the logic on paper, because they've never been told to do that.
Right.
There's, or even a mortgage. Look, mortgages are costing you 3.5-4%, let's say now, right? Typically, it's not a bad idea to have a mortgage. And if you have money, invest that money, because you're probably going to make more than the 4%, but you have to make 4% after taxes. Okay. Number one. And number two, some people are not comfortable with debt, period. And if that's the case, then the first objective should be to pay off the debt. But that's for some people. Like my dad doesn't want to see a nickel go of his value, of his money, go down in value. He's pure GICs. I'm not going to kill the guy. It might not be right, but that's what keeps him comfortable.
Right.
I've educated him. He still feels the same way. So it all depends. Again, it comes back to it all depends.
Yeah. No, for sure, and you don't want him, stressed out, and then he's more likely to make a wrong decision, right? If you put him heavily into equities or
Exactly.
something, and then he hears what's happened the last few days in the markets, and then he starts selling, right? And it's like, well, maybe
Exactly.
he shouldn't have been in those in the first place if that's how he's going to react,
Correct.
right?
As
So,
long as
yeah.
people know again what the consequences are of being too conservative or too aggressive,
Hmm.
as long as they know what the consequence and they're comfortable with that. And in other words, I can have somebody who says, "No, I don't want any guarantee. I don't want any fluctuation." That's fine. I'm 100% with you.
Yeah, you just
Just
plan
know
around
that.
that at that point. Yeah.
Just know that in that case, you'll retire at 60 and you'll have 30,000 to spend.
Hmm.
And as long as the client knows that, and I'm not here to judge, I'm here to educate and show the consequences of any decision that's being made.
Right.
And then if that's fine with the client, we implement. That's all there is to it.
Well, for sure.
But that's what comes. That's what comes with being with a planner who is not biased towards any strategy or any product.
Right. Right. Yeah, you get presented the menu, and then you pick what's the best fit for you.
Exactly.
You get counsel on that way, as opposed to just being told to buy X because they didn't sell enough of those that day or that
Exactly.
month. Yeah. Yeah.
If you're trying to be convinced to buy something, that's another red flag. Let's go back to the red flags, okay?
Right.
If you're really feeling like you're being pushed, then man, you walk out.
Yeah,
You know?
that's a big flag for sure.
Yeah.
Yeah. Like I know when you and I met, I never felt pushed to do any one thing. It was just more, here's what to consider, and then ultimately I make the decision where you invest and how to do everything, how to do it and
Exactly.
stuff. But yeah, it feels more like you're speaking with like a professional that has your best interest at heart, as opposed to someone where you're like, are they just saying this because they're trying to sell me this fund?
Right.
Yeah, I think that wasn't in my head, right? Whereas if I
Exactly.
spoke to someone that did sell them, I'd always be wondering, are they really suggesting this for the right reason? You know what I mean? You always wonder,
No,
right? Yeah.
absolutely. So make sure you're dealing with somebody who doesn't get paid based on product.
Hmm.
And that's where, again, let's go back 45 minutes or an hour ago of the letter of engagement where it spells out exactly how an advisor gets compensated.
That's right. Yeah, no, that's great. Like to have that, and the advisor is very reluctant to talk about their compensation or anything. Then that's kind of a flag right there too, right?
That's a flag that'll slap you right in the face right away.
Yeah.
Absolutely.
Yeah.
Absolutely.
So I got two more questions for you. So one is kind of going back to the whole executing
Yes,
an early
yes.
retirement thing. How should early retirees deal with moving money out of their RRSP early? Because there's
Okay.
obviously repercussions if you take it out before you're supposed to.
Yes. So the time to take out money from an RSP, whether you're retired or not, is the time where your income is going to be lower than it will be in the future. So if you're retiring at 55, for example, and you're going to get your pensions from Canada at 65, and there's debate on whether you should take it at 65 or 60, and that's something let's leave that for another show. But you can take out RSPs when your income is low. So if you're retiring at 55 and you have, non-registered money outside your RSP or TFSAs that you're going to use to live off, then you should start withdrawing RSPs because you're not going to have too much taxable income. Right? So at between 55 and 60, for example, you might have very little income if you're retired,
Mm-hmm.
which wouldn't be a bad idea to start withdrawing some income. Now, I have clients who they lost their job and they haven't worked for a year. So now I'm telling them, let's take out money from your RSP right now. Take it and put it into your TFSA. You have nothing to lose. So it all depends on the amount of income that you have and how much income you can expect to have going forward. And that's where my tool comes in, where I'm able to make projections as to how much income somebody will have. And that way we can say, okay, between this year and that year, we can withdraw a lot of RSPs. Between this year and that year, we shouldn't. So again, it depends on how much money people have and how much income they have. But during low income years, low taxable income years, that's when you should start taking money out of your RSPs.
Mm-hmm. Hey, can you talk about that's very helpful, John, but can you also talk about the basic personal amount as well? Because I don't know if everybody knows about that, and how, if you're retired, you can basically withdraw from the RRSP and actually use that money to basically have some tax-free funds, essentially.
Right. So it's tax time very soon, and so the first 12,000 or so dollars of taxable income that someone makes is tax free. So let's say you have no income and you decide to take $12,000 out of your RSP, or close to $13,000 out of your RSP, that comes to you tax free. You're going to pay when you're taking it out of the bank or your portfolio, okay? But you're going to get it back at tax time if you have no other income. Now, another important aspect to remember is that if you have children, this depends again on your situation. People might have certain tax credits. There's different tax credits that people have that can even bump that amount of money into a higher bracket or into a higher amount. So there are people that could take out $20,000 from their investments or their RSPs without paying any taxes, depending if they're married, what age, if they have children, what expenses they can declare, so on and so forth. So it takes, again, someone who has good knowledge in tax, and someone who that can advise you and say, here's a good time to take out money, and here's not a good time to take out money. For example, the one client that I'm always going back, because we're working on a situation now, is where him come at 71, he's going to have a huge tax bill because of his RSPs. We're starting to change our strategy now with him. He came to us about a year ago, and we're starting to change our strategies where we're looking at, again, different types of strategies where your investments are growing but tax-free scenario. This is something that I talked to you about, Cornell, maybe something to look at, in the future. Mm-hmm. But back to the original question, the first $12,000 of income that you make is tax-free. So there's room where you can take out money from your RSP.
Mm-hmm. Yeah, I mean, which is great. I mean, if you have, if you're a couple, let's say, right, and you each have that, right? I mean, that's over $20,000 that you can take out tax-free, essentially, right? So that's a pretty substantial amount now, that you could use for your kind of day-to-day spending, that kind of a deal that you're getting tax-free. But like John said, there are different tax credits, things like that. So it's not always it's just that number. That's all you have to think about. Like I know, if you have an accountant, or if you do your taxes yourself and you use a good financial, a good accounting software, right? They should factor all that in. So kind of, do your own math, or, seek a professional accountant that you use to, use the professional software that was very good and will account for that, or deal with an accountant that will take that into account, so they can kind of structure things for you tax efficiently there. But I mean, it's a good thing to know about, right? I mean, that you can get over 20K just tax free like that. So you could, because I've talked to some people, right, where they're not earning any income, so they can just take that RSP money and they take just a bit to cover that basic personal amount, right? So they take like the 20-something thousand from the RSP, put into, and then they basically get that money now tax free. So when they put into the RSP, they were maybe earning a lot of money. They were they would have gone taxed a lot by it on that money. But now, because they put it in the RSP and they're taking it out at this lower amount, now that they're getting that money tax free, which is pretty. It's a pretty sweet gig. So
exactly.
Yeah. So just something to think about, or ask your accountant about, or read up on it, that kind of a thing. That amount does change from from over the years. Like the government can change it and such. So you can always Google.
It's been increasing. I think it moves along with inflation. So
yeah.
It moves from one year to another.
Yeah. Like I saw it change from I believe it was last year to this year. But yeah, so you can always Google it and find out what it is, currently. But yeah, like your tax software, your accountant would know that. John, do you guys do at your firm? Do you guys do accounting as well for people, or is it just financial planning?
Excuse me. Tax returns and stuff like that. No, we give a lot of advice, obviously, but not actual tax preparing or anything like that. I have people that I refer. Mm-hmm. I refer clients to accountants, depending on how complicated things are or not. But as far as doing taxes, no, we don't.
Gotcha. Yeah. So if somebody wants to speak with you about this kind of stuff, they can you can help them kind of with that planning piece, and then you would, I guess, deal with their accountant to make sure, or help them kind of to make sure that when they do their own taxes, or with their talk with their accountant, that this is factored in, because so that they're aware of the whole strategy and everything.
Absolutely. And any kind of tax suggestion that I make, I'm always saying, let's speak to your accountant first. And
Yeah,
I usually want to take part in the conversation as well.
for sure. Makes
Um,
sense.
but I just want to cover my back when it comes to that, because I'm by trade, I'm not an accountant, that's for sure.
Right. Yeah. So, well, yeah, I mean, my understanding is with most financial planners, they aren't accountants also. So, financial planning is one field. And then when it comes tax time, they work together with the accountant that the person may have to make sure that everything is synchronized, that everyone knows what's going on, what the strategies are. And then
Exactly.
that way you're executing things efficiently from the accounting taxation side and also from the financial planning side. So,
Exactly.
yeah, no, that sounds good. Yeah, I just thought I'd ask that as well. One kind of final thing is, I mean, thank you for your time, for doing the financial plan for our family. Yeah, it was definitely a great experience for us, from start to finish. And even though I live and breathe this stuff and, have done my own financial plans and stuff in the past, I still felt I received a lot of value just from having someone other than myself, and with your experience too, right? And then fresh set of eyes to look at all our numbers and investments and figure out what is safe for us to retire, whether it's safe for us to retire or not. So a big thank you to you for doing our family's financial plan. It was definitely a great experience. I definitely, highly recommend it. And yeah, that's it. Just thank you so much. And then, tell us a little bit about your financial planning practice and what you offer to help Canadians as well.
Yeah. So look, I really enjoyed myself also, because it's interesting doing a financial plan with individuals or families that know what all this is all about also, because you're able to challenge me with some questions that I don't usually get from the, let's say, the average type of family, right? So it's always fun, talking this stuff with people that are knowledgeable, and also showing them some things or showing them some angles that perhaps they hadn't experienced. So I really enjoyed myself also. I enjoyed the process, and thanks for that. So basically, as I mentioned, I work for a firm called Iron Shield Financial Planning. We're across Canada. The head office is in Ontario, and I was approached to open up an office here in Quebec. But I basically we work with Canadian families, and as probably you'll understand that we don't get paid on commission. We get paid based on doing a financial plan, and then we implement the strategies using investments that we think are best for clients. And as I said, I'm more biased towards exchange traded funds. So generally speaking, the fees are almost nil when it comes to the investments. And all Canadian families are welcome. I used to specialize in business owners, but I used to only accept business owner clients, actually, because I really have a passion for that. But there's been quite a bit of, last time I did your show, I had several clients that were asking me if we're able to work with them, and they weren't business owners. And I told them, you were a listener on Cornell's podcast, and then fine. But I've decided to open it up now with a new firm that I'm involved with. I have a little bit more help when it comes to administration and stuff like that, so I'm able to take on a few more clients. So we're open for clients like that. And one interesting offer that I have, and I mentioned to you earlier that millennials are really getting the shaft in a sense, because every single millennial that I've dealt with and that I work with have told me not my words, but I'll still say it, what an awful experience they had with people in the banking industry. Because like I said, if you have little money or you're starting out, you're not going to get a lot of attention. That's a fact. That's just how it is. And so what I've decided to do is, we're doing something with online with millennials, where I'm helping people with their financial planning and retirement planning. And we do it online for a monthly fee. And that's something that I've talked to you about, Cornell. But it's quite an interesting offer that perhaps I'm not going to get into too much detail right now. But if they have any questions, people have any questions, you can obviously call me or contact you. But it's something that's interesting, where it's a monthly fee. It's very affordable, and you're not getting shafted with commissions. As a matter of fact, the investment side is almost free. So I have some clients that are actually spending less money for their investment advice from a percentage point of view, they're paying a lot less than what very high net worth families are paying for portfolio managers. all this to say that it's very, very cheap, and it's done like this because, let's face it, millennials don't have a ton of money to be spending when it comes to advice. And the truth is, fees they take up a lot of money, let's say, and there's many ways that you can get around paying fees, especially as a millennial. And we have lots of tricks that we can show people on how to use their money. And I offer on Fridays, we have a Facebook group for the millennial client segment where people are asking questions. So they're pretty much getting the financial advice they need, but they're getting it online through social media and stuff like that, which is what millennials love. Now, more established families, they have, let's say, more complex needs. Like yourself, for example, it would be hard to do what we did online with you, like only through social media and stuff like that. But I have obviously clients that are in my private practice, and I deal with them across Canada. The way I've dealt with you, it's a little bit more complicated, so there's a little bit more connection. So we help established families as well with their financial planning and implementation of the plan as well. So it's quite interesting what we do.
All right, John. Well, thanks so much for that, and thanks for, like I said, once again, thanks again for doing our financial plan, and thanks for coming on the show.
Had a great time, Cornell. As you can see, we always have a good time when we talk, so I really enjoyed it.
For sure. I'll see you next time. We'll have you on again. I think I mentioned you were, one of, if not the most popular, most downloaded podcast I've ever had on the show. So it's nice to have you back, and I'm looking forward to many more. All right, I hope you enjoyed the episode with John. Don't forget to take him up on his offer for a complimentary consultation to get some of your financial planning and investment questions answered by going to buildwealthcanada.ca/John. That's buildwealthcanada.ca/John, just JOHN. You'll, of course, also get my free gift on the top 5 questions to ask your financial planner when you do sign up. And last but not least, don't forget to try out the index investing course, risk-free, to learn how to passively grow your portfolio while also paying the lowest fees in Canada. The course takes you through every detail of how I personally invest. And on top of that, you'll have 60 days to go through it and see if it's right for you. And if it's not, you'll get a full refund, no questions asked. So once again, you can try out the course risk-free at buildwealthcanada.ca/invest. All right, so have a wonderful week and talk to you soon.
Thanks for listening to the Build Wealth Canada podcast at www.buildwealthcanada.ca.